By the end of this video, you're going to know everything you need to know to capture incredible footage with the GoPro Mission 1 Pro. And by the way, if you own the Mission 1, everything in this video is going to basically be the same. There's just going to be a few frame rates and open gate settings that won't be available on the Mission 1 like they are on the Mission 1 Pro. So first of all, let's talk about how to get the microSD card and battery installed in the Mission 1 Pro. So I've got my microSD card right here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna gently pull down on this door and then lift it up. So I recommend getting in the microSD card first. It's a little bit easier to do that before the battery's installed. So what you wanna do when inserting it, you wanna have the text facing toward the inside. You're gonna line it up there and you're just gonna press down and you'll need to use a fingernail and you're gonna hear it click into place right there. Next, for inserting our battery, if you look inside here, you'll see the battery contacts need to be upward. So you need to put your battery in like this. So the GoPro label is going to face toward the microSD card. And you're gonna gently push it in. It's gonna click into place. And then of course, right here is the USB-C port. When we want to charge it, that's right where we're gonna plug it in. So the door just clicks back into place and you wanna make sure the red's not showing here. If the red's showing, that means the camera is not currently waterproof, which by the way, this camera is waterproof down to 66 feet in depth. But you wanna make sure it's sealed. This would be a very bad place for water to get into the camera. And while we're at it, let's get the lens hood attached. So the lens hood that comes with this, I love this feature. Keeps those really bad looking lens flares off the lens here. And the lens hood's gonna have an arrow on the top right here. And you wanna make sure that arrow is pointing at the top. So you're just gonna gently push this on and it's going to go around the front part of that lens. So it's going to go all the way around here. I like to just do a quick check to make sure it's approximately even. That lens hood's gonna go a long way to helping you capture incredible footage with this camera. So first of all, let's get familiar with our camera. First, this button right here on the top, that is the shutter button. This will be the button that you hit whenever you want to start recording a video, taking a photo, anything like that. In addition, here on the front is the replaceable lens cover. So if you were to ever break this lens cover, it does come off. I will remove the lens hood to show you. So all you have to do to get this off is twist gently, and it's gonna pop right off. And this, of course, underneath here is the lens that the lens cover protects. And when you wanna put this back on, make sure the blue dot right here lines up here, and then you're just going to gently twist it back to the right. And after you do that, just check all around here to make sure that there's no gaps. This should fit back nice and tight. And these two dots right here on the end, the black ones, these are microphones. So these two microphones help pick up sound from the front of the camera. So if you're standing at the front of the camera talking to it, these are gonna help pick up really good audio. And then this little white light looking thing right here, this is the ambient light sensor. So this helps ensure that you get a good white balance whenever you have that set to auto. And then this right here next to it, this is the status light. So anytime you're recording, that light right there is going to be on and it's going to be blinking red. Right here is the front screen. So if you were vlogging and talking to the camera, it's really handy to have this on the front. And that's gonna show you basic things like how much space is left on your microSD card, your battery percentage, and what mode and settings you're in. So on this side, this is the mode button, and this also is the power on and off button. So you press it once, it powers on, and then if it's already powered on, you can tap it and it's gonna toggle those modes left to right, then it's gonna start at the beginning again. And then if you want to power off the camera, all you have to do is push and hold, and it's gonna power off. And then going back to the mode button side, this right here, in case you're wondering, is a drain microphone cover. This is not meant to be open. This is designed to drain water, but it's not a door or latch, so do not try to open this. It's not meant to come off. And then going to the back here again, up here in the upper left, this is also a status light. So when you're recording, right up there, you're gonna see that light. And then down here in the lower left, this is also another microphone. And of course, this right here is the touchscreen, which this touchscreen is super responsive on the Mission 1 Pro. I would say this screen is more responsive than any GoPro I've ever owned. So I'm really pleased with that. And this touchscreen also is very bright and very large. I really like the touchscreen. And then if we take this off the tripod for a moment and look at the bottom, underneath here is the speaker. So when you record a video and you want to listen to it play back, that's where the speaker is, right there under the folding fingers. And by the way, the folding fingers, if you want to use the traditional action camera mount, you can pull those out and they're available right there for that. But if you want to use the 1/4" 20, which is right here, for a tripod, something like this, you can do that as well. And of course, the magnetic latch mount, if you use any of the magnetic latches, that's going to be right here on the bottom. Do note that when you first power on the Mission 1 Pro, you will need to connect it with the GoPro Quick app, and then you will need to install an initial firmware update. The firmware update takes a couple minutes to install, and it'll push it and update it automatically pretty quickly through the GoPro Quick app. But do make sure you put a microSD card in the Mission 1 Pro first. There has to be that microSD card for the app to transfer the file for the firmware update to the camera. Next, we're going to explore some settings that I recommend changing in the main menu. We're going to swipe down, and you're going to be taken to the general menu right here. So on this general menu, right here with the beeps, you can turn off the beeps if you don't want them on at all. And you can adjust the volume, I'll show you that in a moment. I like to keep mine set at low. And the LEDs, same thing. I like to keep those on, that's really helpful. And then for the orientation, that's the other setting I like to turn on. I like to keep it locked at horizontal. And then if you have any lens mods, this is where you're gonna click to set those. I generally keep it at auto detect though, because this camera does a good job at auto detecting, but if it doesn't detect them, you can toggle here between the ND filters, and it's gonna help you choose what you need to there. And then anytime you're using this camera underwater, you're going to want to hit the screen lock right there. It's gonna help ensure the water doesn't start pressing on here and changing a bunch of settings on you. And then if you do wanna use voice control, you can turn that on right here, and you can give the GoPro different commands to start or stop recording for you. And then the front display, you've got 4 different options. I like to do actual screen. That's my personal preference for that. And then quick capture, if you want to enable that. Quick capture is where you can press the shutter button up here at the top, even if your camera's turned off, and it's going to turn on and start recording in the mode that you have it set to. And then if you toggle once left, if you need to connect any devices to this, such as a gimbal or a microphone, that's how you're gonna do it right there, and it's gonna start the Bluetooth pairing process. But then what we wanna do here is we wanna go to preferences and get into some of the more detailed settings. So the settings that I generally change here, if you go under general, I like to have the auto power off set to 5 minutes. That way, if my camera's on and I'm not doing anything with it for 5 minutes, it's going to automatically power off to save battery time. And for the LEDs, I like to keep them all on. But if you want to be more discreet, if you're filming in public and don't want to draw a lot of attention to your camera, you can set it to back only, and it's not going to show the red light in the front of the camera. It's only going to show the red light up here when you're recording. And then one tip here, if you're not going to use the GPS feature, make sure to have that turned off. That GPS feature is going to use quite a bit of battery power. So if you're not using it, keep it off, and you're gonna help save quite a bit of battery power that way. And then for the audio and voice control, this is gonna show you a bunch of different options: your playback volume, your camera sound volume, which you can do anywhere from high, medium, or low. I personally like low. I don't like my volume too loud on there. And you also can mute it if you select this right there. But I like to have a little bit of sound so that I know that my button press was successful. And then down here for the raw audio, the GoPro has 32-bit float built into it, and you could get that standalone WAV file with no dynamic compression applied. So I recommend turning this on if you really value getting the best audio. This is definitely a pro feature, and you're going to avoid things like potential for clipping, and you're gonna have a lot more flexibility if you need to edit that file later on. So I recommend turning that on, and you're going to have that separate raw audio file for each and every video clip that you record on here. And then of course, if you wanna do voice control, this is gonna show you the language and the commands down here. So I recommend going through those if you need to know which commands to use. And then for the displays, the screensaver, I like to have that to never. I like to be able to see what's on there. And then for the capture info, this is going to be off by default, but I highly recommend turning this on. This is definitely a pro feature. Let me show you what I mean. So if we go back here to the video mode, what you're going to see across the top here is you're going to see the shutter speed, the ISO, the EV value, and the white balance. So those are all going to be right there. And that is really good to be able to keep track of those when filming. There are a lot of different reasons you want to be able to see those. It's going to help you if you're using ND filters, or if you're in a dark place and you want to make sure you're not going to get jitter in your footage, which there's going to be a setting I can show you later that will guarantee you never get jitter in your footage. It's super helpful. You were not able to show these values before unless you had the GoPro Lapse firmware installed. So it's really cool that GoPro built this into the stock firmware. Going back to that menu, if you swipe down and toggle left 2 times, you're going to get over here to the camera mic options. This is a whole area where you can set different settings. If you want to have the auto meter show, you can turn it on. And when we go back here, you're going to see it right here on the side. So if you want to keep track of your audio and monitor it, you can have that right there. In addition, you can add a second track. So this shows you how you can do that there. Like if you're doing the media mod, Bluetooth audio, or a USB audio device, when they're connected, they'll show there as a second track option. But finally, if we go all the way over here to the left, this is where we're gonna have our microSD card options. In addition, this is where you can also set up your cloud upload options. So if you want to set your footage to automatically upload to the cloud, if you're a GoPro subscriber, you can scan this and get started right there. And then with your microSD card, if you need to delete any files from this, you can do that right here. But it does note that if you delete it, it is permanent. So make sure you only delete it if you need to. If you ever want to check your battery status, all you have to do is swipe down, swipe left one, go to preferences, and then go all the way down here to about. And you can click on battery info. It's going to tell you what battery you have installed. In this case, it's the new Enduro 2. It's going to give you the battery health of excellent and charger not charging. But if we plug in a charging cable, let me show you what it's going to show. Give it a moment to sync there, and it's going to say fast. So if you have a charger hooked up that is fast enough to fast charge it, it's going to let you know. And by the way, the charging is very fast on the Mission 1 Pro. GoPro has finally introduced fast charging technology into this camera. So if you have a fast charger connected to it, you can go from 0 to 80% in just 27 minutes. This is much, much faster than any prior GoPro where it could take an hour and a half, 2 hours to charge that battery. And then to get from the 0 to 100%, it'll take about 54 minutes. I'm gonna tell you about the icons and the gestures you can use on the rear touchscreen. First of all, up here in the upper center, this icon right here, this shows you which capture mode you're in. So if you were to change this to photo, that's gonna change to that symbol. If you go back to a video mode, it's gonna change it back to the video camera. And then up here in the upper left, this shows the approximate amount of time you have left on your microSD card before it runs out of space. So this is going to dynamically update depending on what frames per second, which resolution, and which mode you're in. Currently at 4K 30, we have 8 hours and 3 seconds left. Down here where it says the W, these are customizable on-screen shortcuts. So currently I have it set to the lens where we can change that. We can go from super view to wide to linear. And then down here at the bottom, this is the capture mode and the mode information. And this is where you're gonna tap to customize all those settings, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And then up here in the upper right, this is the battery status. So currently it shows 86% for the charge, and it has that charging symbol because I do have it plugged in and it's currently charging. Over here on the right, this is where we can adjust our aspect ratio. So we could do the 16:9, the 9:16, or we could do the open gate 4:3. And then down here is where you can change the resolution frames per second if you want to do that quickly without delving into all of the other settings. And as far as gestures on the touchscreen, first of all, if you tap it, it's gonna take away all the icons. And then if you tap it again, it's gonna bring them all back. And then if you swipe left or right in the center here, this is where you can toggle between all the modes. If you swipe down from the top of the screen, this is where you can go to the dashboard. And if you swipe up from the bottom of the screen, this is where you can look at your footage that you've captured. You can click the squares up here and you're gonna be able to toggle through all of your footage that you've recorded. And by the way, I've noticed this toggling is much faster. Everything loads faster on the Mission 1 Pro than prior GoPros as well. And then one helpful tip that has existed on prior GoPros and also exists on the Mission 1 Pro, if you press and hold on the screen, you're going to be able to set up your exposure control. So this is where you can tell this camera to prioritize exposure there over other parts of the frame. So you can see as I move this around, you can see the lighting adjusting in that scene depending on where I tell it to expose properly. So if we tell it to expose the sky properly, it of course gets darker in the rest of the frame. So basically, you can adjust any part of the frame to prioritize it and then hit the check mark, and it's going to set that exposure bracket for that part of the scene. And it's going to stay there until you remove it or until you power off your GoPro. And if you want to remove it, all you gotta do is tap in the box and it's gonna go away. And before we get into the video settings, I wanna quickly mention one other thing about the modes here. So these are the default modes that are available on this camera. But if you want to manage these modes, like if there's any of these you really don't want to have there, if you don't want to accidentally record in them, all you got to do is go up to the top here and click Manage Modes. And this is also where you can customize each of these default modes, which is very cool. We're going to get into that in a moment. And there's a whole bunch of other ones that are grayed out currently. These are modes that you can select, and if you want them available in the carousel, all you have to do is click on it once to make it blue, and it's going to show up in the carousel. And if you don't want it there, click again and make it gray. All right, so now that we've done all of that, let's delve into these modes, and I'm going to show you the very best settings for each mode. And the primary focus with this video is going to be how you can get the best footage directly out of the camera with minimal to no editing. If you want to do more advanced color grading and things like that, I'm going to show you that in a separate video. We're gonna click down here at the bottom, and this is going to be our video mode. I recommend selecting 4:3, which is open gate for the aspect ratio. And the reason for that is this gives you the flexibility later on to either do horizontal or vertical. But if you film it in one of these, either horizontal or vertical, with the 16:9, which is horizontal, or the 9:16, which is vertical, you're not gonna have a lot of flexibility later on to reframe that, like if you film it in 4:3. And even if you want it to be horizontal 16:9 timeline footage later on with the 4:3, you can still drop that footage on the timeline and it's going to just center it by default. But it's good to do 4:3 just in case you want that flexibility later on to do any vertical type videos like YouTube Shorts, Instagram, anything like that. And for the default daytime filming, I do recommend doing 8K. And the reason for that is that's going to give you the ability to crop that later on if you want to give different perspectives. You're going to have a lot more pixels available and flexibility to do that. And for the default daytime frame rate, if you do open gate, you can only go as high as 8K 30, which by the way, open gate is simply meaning using the entirety of the sensor in here instead of cropping the footage straight out of camera. So 4:3 uses the entirety of that 1-inch sensor. But if you select 16:9 and do 8K, you're going to be able to do all the way up to 8K 60. So if you really want that 8K 60, if you want to be able to do a little bit of slow motion with that later on, or if you want that 60 frames per second POV feel, then you'll want to change this to 16:9 and do 8K 60. But for my default video setting, I do 4:3 8K and I do 8K 24. For these capture settings right here, I leave all of these alone. However, it is worth noting that if you want to zoom on here, you can do that all the way up to 4X. But do note that when you get beyond the 2X zoom, it becomes more of a digital zoom, and it's generally going to degrade the quality of the video. So what I would do is I keep this at 1X all the time, and I film in 8K, and that way if I want to zoom in later on and crop it when editing, I can do that, and I'm going to have that high quality footage. So I prefer not to bake in the zoom in the camera. I like to have that option available later on. Down here under the image settings, there are some really incredible settings here and also some really important settings. So first of all, for the image tuning, I generally keep this at balanced. However, there are other modes on here, including sport, face, and underwater. So if you're filming underwater, definitely set this to underwater. If you're doing a lot of vlogging or there's a lot of people in it, you might want to set it to face. And then if you're filming sports, anything like that, with that high energy footage, you want to do sport. But 90% of the time I keep this set to balanced and it's done great. Here you can adjust your digital lens. So when you're doing the open gate, you only have the wide or the linear available. But with the linear, do note you can do the horizon lock. That is going to lock that horizon for you. If you select that, the sacrifice is a little bit of a crop. In general, I do keep this at wide unless I'm filming someplace where I don't want that fisheye distortion, in which case I do linear. For the hyper smooth, I like to put this to on, but I don't like to do auto boost unless I'm doing something like running where I need that extra stabilization, then I put it to auto boost. But the reason I do on most of the time is on helps preserve some of that natural feel. It doesn't feel like your camera's on a gimbal, it feels more realistic. And in addition, on doesn't have the crop that auto boost does. Auto boost can really crop in your footage, so I like to keep this to on by default. Bit depth, you definitely want to change this to 10-bit. 10-bit is going to give you those 1 billion color shades, but if you keep it set to 8-bit, you're only going to get 16 million. So you're really limiting yourself if you do 8-bit. And by the way, this apply to all option down here. If you want to apply any of these settings to all of the video modes, you can select apply to all and then tap it again here, and it's going to apply that to all of the video modes right there. This is really nice to have this. I am not aware of this setting existing on other cameras, and it certainly hasn't on GoPro before, so this is really handy to have. And bitrate. So on this camera, the Mission 1 Pro, we have 3 options now. We have standard, we have high, which is equivalent to 160 megabits per second, but then we have max. Max is equivalent to 240 megabits per second. I highly recommend using the 240 megabits per second. You are going to have larger file sizes, but the quality and clarity in your footage is going to just look really, really nice. And this is going to be how you can get the best footage straight out of the camera. So I recommend doing the 240. If you don't want your file to be quite as big, then I recommend doing high, but I don't recommend ever keeping it set to standard. I recommend doing at least high, but max, if you can, is going to give you the best. And again, we can select apply to all, and it's gonna apply that to all video modes. For the HLG HDR, I generally keep that off. For color, we have 5 modes now on the Mission 1 Pro. Previously, we had up to 3 modes on GoPros. But here's what we have. Down here at the bottom, we have the GP Log 2. GP Log 2 is great if you want to do any grading with that footage later on. It can be a little bit tricky to grade, and I'm going to release a separate video where I show you how to grade that footage, and I also provide some absolutely free conversion and cinematic LUTs. You also have the flat mode, and flat mode is a mode that's been available on other GoPros. But then another new mode is the cinematic mode. So if you don't want to do any color grading, but you want to have a cinematic look straight out of your camera, select cinematic. But if you just want that simple, natural look, you don't want anything fancy, you just want it to look like what you're capturing, select natural. But then if you want that more saturated look, select vibrant at the top, and that's going to give that to you. If you want footage that you can just share with minimal editing straight out of the camera, natural in general is going to be the best choice. Looking at the shutter speed. So here is where we can configure this so you will never, ever get jitter in your footage. So first of all, the auto shutter option has been available on GoPros in the past. Fixed option has also been available. With the fixed, you can set a static shutter speed. But the range, for the first time, the range is finally available on a GoPro. Some competing action cameras have had an option like this for a couple gens now, but GoPro never has. So here's the key with this range. When you're using electronic image stabilization, which HyperSmooth is, you need to have a certain minimum shutter speed in order for that to function properly. And what happens if we get shutter speeds that get anywhere below about 1/200, we start to see jitter in our footage. This is especially going to be apparent in low light. But what you can do here with this range is you can set this to avoid that. So if you were filming in 24 frames per second, you want to toggle this to the middle, and you want to set that shutter speed range from 1/192 to 1/6144. And basically what this ensures is your shutter speed is never going to go slower than 1/192. So this obviously is going to be good for daytime or when it's getting dark in the evening, but if you're in and out of a lot of woods where it's shady and sunny, this is going to help your camera not dip that shutter speed in order to properly expose it. If it dips it too slow, you are going to get jitter. But if you select that option there, your motion blur and EV comp options are going to be grayed out. But if you don't select that, let's say you stick with auto, when we go back here, there is this motion blur setting and you have 5 different options you can select on here. By default, it starts at adaptive, where it'll automatically adjust the motion blur and low light based on the camera motion. Then you also can do the max blur reduction. If you hate motion blur and you don't want it, you can do that. And that essentially is just going to keep your shutter speed faster. I don't recommend doing that though. But then you also have the cinematic low, you have the cinematic medium, and you have the cinematic high. What I like to do though is I just like to set that shutter speed range, and I find that that is the most stable. Now, when we talk about my cinematic settings in another video, you can throw all of this out the window because it's going to be totally different settings. But if you don't want to mess with any of that, then you want to do these settings right here. And then for white balance, I recommend keeping this to auto. If you just want the best footage straight out of the camera, auto is going to do really well for you. And then for the ISO, I recommend doing 25 to 1600. On prior GoPros, I didn't recommend going over 800 for the ISO, but the way this camera is designed with the 1-inch sensor and some of the other algorithms, going up to 1600 is generally going to still yield very good looking footage. And the cool thing on here is the lowest ISO value is 25. So this camera is going to prefer those lower ISOs as much as possible. And you can see this up here at the top. Even with a shutter speed of 1/192 right now, that ISO is hovering down there close to 100. That's going to give you really clear, really good looking footage with that low ISO. There's not going to be the noise and grain in it. And then for the sharpness, I generally recommend keeping this at low or medium, but never go to high. High is going to look really bad. It's going to look really over sharpened, especially in woods like this right here. It's just going to be every single blade of grass or leaf is going to be hyper sharpened. If you want to add sharpness later on while editing, go down here and select low. And then finally, denoise. So GoPro has built a pretty powerful denoising algorithm into here. In general though, I find it can make some of the footage look a little bit softer than I like. So if you are filming purely in the daytime, I recommend keeping denoise to low. That's going to yield the very best looking footage from this. But if you are doing some low light footage, I do recommend putting this to medium. In general though, I don't recommend going to denoising high. I find that it's just a little too much and it does not end up looking good. So at most, go to medium. And then finally, down here under audio, for the audio tuning, you've got 2 different options here. You've got standard and you've got voice. So if you're going to be doing a lot of talking, I do recommend going to voice. It's going to give really good quality audio when you're talking to the camera. And then for the wind reduction, generally I just recommend keeping this at auto. The GoPro is going to detect that background noise or the wind, and it's going to adjust automatically, but you do have on or off if you just want it on all the time or off all the time. And of course, if you're using an external mic, these settings are not really going to matter here, but if you're using the built-in microphones, that's where these will matter. All right, so now that we've set our default video settings there, I want to go over here to the vlog mode, and I want to show you the settings that I recommend for vlogging. So there's just a couple we're going to change here. So for vlogging, I recommend doing 16:9 unless you know you're going to want vertical footage later on, in which case you could do the 4:3 open gate. But the reason I like to do 16:9 here is I like to have 8K 60. That way we have some of that flexibility later on to slow down some of that footage to about 50% of the speed it was captured at. There can often be moments in vlogging where you want to do that. And then for the digital lens, I also recommend keeping that at linear for vlogging. That's going to help prevent any of that distortion in your face, anything like that. And then the rest of these settings, we've already set these and we told it to apply to all. So the only one I recommend changing is the shutter range. I do recommend setting that to 1/240 to 1/7680. And the reason for the 1/240 is because 60 frames per second, that is going to represent a shutter angle of 90. It's also going to help prevent jitter when vlogging. And then the other setting I recommend changing for the vlogging mode is set the ISO range to 25 to 1600. So we now have a vlogging mode that's set up as well. And then subject tracking, that is a brand new mode on the GoPro here. So you can actually track a subject and it's very cool. You can go to 4:3 and you can do all the way up to 8K. So I'm gonna just key in these settings. These are essentially gonna be the same as our default video mode, but the difference is this is going to be able to track your subject. So let me show you what I mean here. I'm gonna start it recording and I'm going to go over here and it found me. And it's very cool. Now, obviously, it can't track you forever. It has to be able to see you. If you step off the edge of the screen, it's going to lose you. But if you step back in, it's going to find you again. And it's like you have a camera person filming you. So it is very cool that they added this. I can definitely see some use cases for this, especially while vlogging. If you don't want to have to worry about your positioning when you're vlogging, you can basically keep yourself centered at all times. Let's go to the low light mode. So this mode by default has built-in settings that are going to give you the best results straight out of camera. But there are a few changes that I like to make here. For low light, I still like to do the 4:3. I like to have an open gate, so it's using the whole sensor. 4K, of course, is the only option in low light. And I like to do 24 here. It's gonna allow that shutter to go as low as it can. And then for these other settings, these aren't going to affect the low light quality, but I do like to set the hypersmooth to on, and the bit depth, bit rate, and color, those are gonna carry over. And then for the shutter speed, for this one, I like to keep it at auto. The GoPro is going to bump up the ISO to offset a little bit faster shutter speed because it's going to prioritize not getting jitter in your footage. And so the shutter speed I recommend leaving at auto. The motion blur I recommend leaving at adaptive. The EV comp, leave that at 0. The white balance, leave it at auto. The ISO, of course, is auto. It's gonna be grayed out here. And then the sharpness, keep that at low. And then the reason you don't see any ability to adjust noise on here is the noise reduction is essentially going to be automatically handled in this mode. So the GoPro is going to adjust that for you depending on the scene. This is going to be for handheld filming in low light, but I will have a dedicated video on low light footage showing you how I captured clips like this right here using manual settings on the camera. But these manual settings are going to involve using a gimbal. So I'm not going to get into that in this video today because that is a separate tool and separate technique. And then slow-mo, let's get into these. So the slow-mo settings, here's the key. We make sure slow-mo is selected here. If you want to do burst slow-mo, you can do all the way up to 1080, 960. That's going to be for a short duration clip. But for our standard slow-mo, what I like to do is I like to do 16:9, 4K, 240. So if you select the open gate 4:3 at the top, you can only do up to 4K 120. So I like to do the 16:9, 4K 240. And that's going to yield some really incredible slow-mo clips. And then all of these settings, I'm going to keep default except hypersmooth. We're gonna put that back to on. And then the shutter speed, I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna set the range on it from 1/240 to 1/7680. And then all of these settings, I'm going to keep where they are set currently. And do note when you're using slow-mo mode, you're not going to have audio that's usable because that audio is also going to be slowed down. We already set up the main video mode, so we're gonna go over here to the photo mode. So for capturing a standard photo on here, you can just do the single photo, or you can do intervals, or you can do burst. So there's a whole bunch of settings underneath those that you can customize if you want to. I'm going to show you the standard photo settings, and then those other modes are essentially, you're going to tell it to take a photo every certain amount of seconds in the case of interval, or burst is gonna be to take a bunch of photos in a short amount of time. So under the photo mode here, I recommend doing 50 megapixels unless you're capturing a photo in low light. If you're getting a photo in low light, use the 12 megapixels and it's gonna look a lot better. But in standard daytime lighting, use the 50 megapixels so you get the highest quality results. And then for your output, you can do standard if you just want a JPEG that you don't want to edit later on. If you do want to edit later on, make sure to select RAW. And down here for the lens, you of course can select wide or linear. I recommend linear if there's a lot of people in it. If not, if it's a landscape photo, select wide. For the color, I recommend keeping that at natural. For the shutter, keep that at auto. For the motion blur, keep it at adaptive. EV comp, keep it at 0. ISO do auto, and then keep sharpness at low and denoise at high. It's gonna give you the best photo straight out of the camera. And then for interval, if we go to that, you're gonna see a couple different options. I recommend the same thing of 50 megapixel, and then same with output. If you wanna do editing later on, make sure to select RAW. And then for the interval, you can adjust that right here. So you can go from 5 seconds all the way up to 120 seconds. Basically, this is going to be a dedicated time-lapse mode for photos. But as I'll show you in a moment, you can now do a video and photo time-lapse all at the same time on the Mission 1 Pro. And then all of these settings down here, I recommend keeping at their defaults. And if we go back to burst mode's gonna be the same thing. I recommend doing 50 unless it's at nighttime or in low light. And then the burst rate, you've got a bunch of different options here. You can do 3 in 1 second. You can do 10 in 1 second, 30 in 1 second, 10 in 3 seconds, 30 in 3 seconds, and 30 in 6 seconds. Or you can do auto down here, and this lets your GoPro capture up to 30 photos in 1 second based on your lighting condition. And then all of these settings right here, I recommend keeping set to their defaults. Let's talk about this lapse mode right here. So under lapse, GoPro has combined the motion lapse and the stationary time lapses both into the same mode. So let's talk about motion lapse first. Under motion lapse, I recommend doing the 4:3. It's gonna allow you some additional flexibility later on to adjust the cropping of it if you want to. And then I recommend doing the full 8K. And for the speed, I recommend keeping it at auto. And then for the lens, it's gonna be the same thing, keep it at wide. But if you don't want distortion, put it at linear. And then all of these other settings, I recommend keeping at their defaults. And then if you want to do a stationary time lapse, for the output, if you just want the video and you're sure you're not going to want any photos to edit, you can select a video and it's going to give you that video time lapse file. But if there's any chance you want to edit any photos later on, I recommend selecting video plus JPEG plus RAW. And then I highly recommend doing 4:3. 4:3 is going to allow you to add motion to your time lapse later on. You can do some vertical movement in it, and it's still going to fit nicely on a 16:9 timeline. Resolution, I highly recommend doing 8K. The only exception to that is if you're doing a nighttime time lapse, in which case you want to do 4K, because you're going to get the benefit of those pixels that are much larger. That larger effective pixel size of about 3.6 instead of 1.8 due to the quad Bayer technology. It's going to give you a much less noise in your night lapse, and it's going to look better. But for daytime, you want to do 8K there. And then for interval, if you're doing a sunset time lapse or just a general daytime one for a couple hours, do an interval of 5 seconds. But if you're doing a really long one, you can do intervals all the way up to 60 minutes. So that would be like if you're doing a multi-day, really long time lapse, you might want to have that 60-minute interval. But 5 seconds is generally my go-to on this. And then I don't usually set a limit on the duration. I just like to start and stop it when I want to. And then the timer, I like to keep that at the default of 3 seconds. So for the lens, I like to keep that at wide. For a time lapse, generally having it as wide as possible is great. And then I recommend keeping all of these others set to their defaults if you're doing a daytime time lapse. But if you want to get a nighttime time lapse, here's what I recommend doing. Keep all of these settings up here the same. Do the video plus the photos, do the 4:3, but then here go back to the 4K. And then for the interval at nighttime, you want to do about 20 to 30 seconds. Because this is a 1-inch sensor, 20 seconds is basically equivalent to what the 30 seconds used to be. It's going to let in a lot of light in those 20 seconds, so you can actually bump back the interval a little bit and get some pretty good results there. But then there are going to be some custom settings we want to change down here. For instance, the shutter speed, we want to do fixed. And for that shutter speed at nighttime, if we have an interval of 20 seconds, we want to do 20 seconds for the shutter speed. So if you have 20 seconds for the shutter here and a 20-second interval, In reality, this is going to keep the shutter open for approximately 18 seconds because it needs a couple seconds to process each frame before it goes to the next one. EV comp, I recommend keeping it 0, but then for this mode, I recommend unchecking apply to all because we're gonna customize this mode with the ISO. And I like to do a fixed one for night lapses. And depending on your shutter speed, you could do 800 or 1600. But if you are doing 4K and you're doing a really dark nighttime sky, because of the effective pixel size, I recommend doing ISO of 1600 because it's not going to add too much noise and grain. It's still going to look really good. And with a 20-second shutter and an ISO of 1600, it's going to give you a really well-exposed night sky. You're going to capture a lot of celestial detail in all of the stars and constellations up there. And then for the denoise, I actually recommend selecting medium for this. Medium is going to give you really good results if you just want that video file and you don't want to edit the photos. And of course, with your raw photos, a lot of these settings down here, such as the bit depth, the color, and all of that, that's not going to be baked into your raw file. You're going to be able to customize that look later on if you want to edit those photos. And then finally, the night effects mode. So this one kind of relates to our last mode, but I just wanted to mention you can do the star trails, you can do the light painting, or you can do the vehicle lights. Now I will say for all of these modes, in general, I recommend the default settings that GoPro already has set for these because these are very auto type modes. The only one I recommend changing is changing the 16:9 to the 4:3 because that does give you a little bit of motion flexibility if you want to add some movement to those later on. But then keep it at 4K. And then here you can change the trail length. So the nice thing is you can view examples here. Those are long trails. Those are short trails. And then max right here, that's what max looks like. So pick the one that you like most. I generally stick with long. I like that one best. And then all the rest of these settings, like I mentioned, just keep these set to their defaults. And then for light painting, basically the same thing. I just recommend changing to 4:3. For light painting, I do recommend keeping that max. I think that is best for that. And then all these settings down here, keep these set as they are. And then finally, vehicle lights. I recommend keeping all of these to their defaults as well, except change this to 4:3. And if you want to dig deeper and squeeze the very best of everything that you can out of the Mission 1 Pro, check out this playlist right here. This playlist is packed with lots of other videos that I've created with the Mission 1 Pro to show you how to get the very best in a host of different scenarios.